Welcome to Deep Dive. Today we're going on a journey that might seem, well, a little unexpected at first glance. We're going to try and connect the dark, dreamlike world of David Lynch's Twin Peaks to the ancient symbolic architecture of speculative Freemasonry.
It's definitely not the most obvious pairing, I'll give you that. I mean, you've got this surreal, small-town American murder mystery on one hand, and on the other, a tradition that's, built around old stonemasons' tools and allegorical secrets.
Right. But when you start to peel back the layers and you look past the sort of surface details, you find this incredible shared belief, a belief that the real meaning isn't in the final answer. It's not in the destination.
It's in the quest. It's in the work, the striving. That's where they meet.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We've looked at sources that explore David Lynch's very vocal rejection of neat and tidy endings. We're going to put that right alongside the Masonic system of basically perpetual character building. And we'll see how both of them, in their own unique ways, arrive at the exact same powerful universal symbol, the unfinished temple.
So I guess we should start in those dark woods of Washington State, where the mystery really begins.
So David Lynch, I mean, he's famous for it, right? He just refuses to explain himself. For him, a clear verbal explanation isn't just, a spoiler. He sees it as something that actively damages his art. Why is that?
Well, it really comes down to his belief in the medium itself. He thinks of cinema as its own language. It's a language of pictures and sounds that's meant to communicate feelings, ideas, and intuition, not plain English words.
So trying to translate it back into words is like a bad translation.
Exactly. You're forcing this fluid sensory experience into a rigid logical box, and you just lose everything that made it special. The whole point is for you, the audience, to feel it.
And he has that perfect analogy for this, the donut analogy.
Oh, it's brilliant. The idea is, if you've never tasted a truly great, sweet donut,
how could I possibly describe that experience to you?
you could list the ingredients. I could tell you the ingredients, the shape, the color. I could describe the texture. But you still wouldn't know how good it is. Not until you taste it for yourself. An explanation gives you this shallow intellectual summary, but it robs you of the actual experience, the profound, emotional, intuitive punch.
Which leads to his next point, which is even more intense. For Lynch, closure isn't just unsatisfying. He literally says, closure is death.
And that's the hard lesson he learned from Twin Peaks Season 2. The network, the audience. Everyone was screaming for an answer. They wanted that conventional wrap-it-up ending.
Who killed Laura Palmer?
Right. And Lynch was totally against it.
He felt that once you give that clear explanation, you provide closure. And closure lets people stop thinking. They just move on.
He said that the moment the killer was revealed, Leland Palmer, possessed by Bob, the heart of the show just died. It was over. The real mystery was gone.
But the key here, the philosophical nugget, is that the question wasn't really about the crime.
Precisely. The procedural question is, who killed Laura Palmer? That's a cop show question. The real essential Lynchian question was always, who was Laura Palmer? Because she was the whole town in one person. The beautiful homecoming queen on the surface and this deeply troubled, secret, violent soul underneath. The mystery of her identity was the lens for everything.
So the mystery was the engine, not the destination.
It was the engine. It forced the audience to do what Lynchian calls the work. You were immersed, you were theorizing, discussing, you were feeling your way through it intuitively. That engagement, that mental labor, that's the real experience. The second the mystery ended, the work stopped.
And if the work stops, then the audience doesn't get to use their intuition, which, as we'll get into, Lynch sees as the most important tool we have.
And to even begin that work, you have to navigate the core principle of all of Lynch's creations, which is duality. He's always putting the macabre right up against the mundane.
You see it constantly in Twin Peaks. The beautiful small-town America, the diners, the pine trees, this idyllic little community. And it's pressed right up against this hidden mud and muck and slime and horror, the stuff lurking in the woods and behind people's doors.
And it's easy to look at that and think he's just being cynical. Everything good is secretly evil.
But the sources we looked at suggest something way more profound. It's about creating appreciation.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act. Lynch himself says that the more darkness you gather up, the more light you can actually see. The whole reason to show the horror is to make you appreciate the simple, pure bliss of the light. That's why E. Jean Cooper's obsession with a damn fine cup of coffee and cherry pie isn't just a funny character quirk, it's a deep philosophical statement.
Those little moments of bliss only feel so profound because they exist right next to a horrific abyss.
Exactly. And this idea of perfect balance is actually hardwired into the show's visual language. It's tied to a really specific electrical metaphor.
The AC current.
The AC current. Lynch talks about the 60-cycle frequency of American broadcasting. Alternating current, or AC, literally alternates between an equally positive and an equally negative voltage. It's a perfect wave. And that cycle, that tension, symbolizes the necessary balance of light and dark, positive and negative.
And for anyone who watched the show when it first aired, on an old tube TV, that's literally how the picture was made.
Yes. The old cathode ray tube, the CRT, forms an image by using both positive voltage, which creates light, and negative voltage, which blocks the light to create darkness. The image you're watching, the dream on the screen, is created by this perfect alternation of opposites. If you have too much positive, the screen goes white. Too much negative, it goes black. The art itself requires that perfect balance.
Okay, so if the TV show is the dream and our mind is trying to decode it, who represents the audience in the show itself?
The show frames the mind as a detective. Our intuition is the detective inside all of us. And agents like Dale Cooper are the literal stand-ins for the audience's mind, engaging with that mystery. He doesn't just use logic. He uses dreams, visions, intuition, these Zen-like practices to solve the case. He's constantly getting clues. That's the light to balance out the darkness of the crime.
And that active process, the detective work, is the good part. That's the virtuous state. But the second he pushed for the final answer, the moment he insisted on defining the end of the mystery, he got corrupted.
Completely. Cooper's possession by Bob, his transformation into the evil Mr. C, that wasn't just some plot twist. It was a brutal commentary on the whole situation. The investigation literally ended with the darkness taking over. Lynch used Cooper's downfall to show that the audience's hunger for a simple answer, for closure, which usually just means more violence and sadness. It actually destroyed the one character who embodied that pure, inquisitive spirit.
So the lesson is that the work itself, the continuous process of using your intellect and intuition to navigate that duality, that is the moral good. And demanding an end to that work is just asking for disaster.
And that is the perfect bridge, because this whole idea of constant, conscious, moral work of navigating darkness and light, that is precisely the foundation of speculative Freemasonry. They just call it moral architecture.
Okay, so speculative Freemasonry, it defines itself in these very specific terms that, they sound immediately relevant to this whole idea of personal striving.
The classic definition is a peculiar system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. And to really get that, you have to look back at its roots in operative masonry. These were the literal physical builders, the stonemasons who built the great cathedrals of Europe. They had trade secrets, and they kept them secret.
But then something changed. They started accepting members who weren't actually stonemasons, the accepted masons.
Right, and that's the big shift. From operative to speculative. It meant that speculative masons became builders of character instead of builders of cathedrals. They took the entire language, all the tools, all the symbols of the old stonemasons, and turned it into this huge, elaborate system of allegory for self-improvement. It's meant to be a very serious, solemn undertaking.
And even the language they use reflects this idea of endless moral work. The members are craftsmen, and the lodge itself where they meet isn't called a club. It's a quarry or a scene of toil.
It's all about emphasizing that this is work, not play. Freemasonry is very clear that it doesn't just hand you anything. Any spiritual or intellectual rewards have to be earned through genuine effort. It doesn't give you playthings. It puts working tools in your hands. The expectation from day one is that the path to being a better person requires active, conscious labor.
Which sounds a lot like Lynch demanding the audience do the intuitive work to get his films. Here, the Mason is required to do the moral work on himself.
And that work is all structured through these symbols and allegories.
We said that the truths Masonry teaches aren't actually secret. They're pretty universal ideas about morality.
Yeah, the truths themselves are common to many philosophies, but the method of teaching them is what's considered secret. It uses this rich garment of symbolism and ritual to get these deep lessons across intuitively, much like Lynch uses images and sound instead of just words.
And that method starts with giving moral meaning to the old operative tools. Let's look at the first ones an entered apprentice gets, the 24-inch gauge, the common gavel, and the chisel.
Right, so the 24-inch gauge, for a stonemason, it's just a ruler for measuring work. Morally, it's a tool to teach the mason how to measure and divide his time, his life, really. The day is divided into 3 equal parts: One for service to God and your fellow man, one for your work and providing for yourself, and one for rest and refreshment.
So right away, it frames your life as this structured, balanced project,
Well,
kind of geometry of time.
then you get the common gavel. The stonemason used it to break off the sharp, rough corners from a stone just pulled out of the quarry. Morally, the gavel is for knocking off all superfluous knobs and excrescences.
And what are those superfluous knobs in a moral sense?
There are vices, our unchecked passions, our character flaws, things like vanity, greed, anger, apathy. The gavel is a symbol that you must actively work to subdue those passions. You have to break away the rough moral edges before you can do any finer work. After that, you use the chisel, which is for the more detailed smoothing and preparing of the stone.
And this whole process, this breaking and smoothing, it leads us to the central symbol of striving in Masonry, right? The ashlar.
The ashlar transformation, yeah. It symbolizes a person's entire journey. You start as the rough ashlar. That's the stone, totally unhewn, right out of the quarry. It represents us in our natural state, unpolished, before we get a virtuous education and consciously start the work.
And the goal is to become the perfect ashlar.
The perfect ashlar, a stone that's been squared and smoothed, ready to be tested by the squaring compasses. But here's the crucial part. The sources describe the perfect ashlar as representing the mind of a man in the decline of years after a well-spent life of piety and virtue.
So it's not a state you achieve and then you're done. It's the result of a lifetime of working towards an ideal.
Exactly. If the perfect ashlar was some final static goal, the work would stop. But because it represents the culmination of a lifetime of striving, the work is, by definition, continuous. You're always the apprentice. You're always using that gavel and chisel. You never get rid of every single rough edge.
Which brings us back to duality. Just like Lynch built Twin Peaks on the tension between positive and negative voltage, Masonry builds the inescapable duality of life right into the floor of the lodge.
That's the mosaic pavement, the iconic black and white checkered floor. It's explicitly emblematic of human life, checkered with good and evil. It's a constant visual reminder that you can't have light without darkness or joy without sorrow.
And the Mason's job is to be the conscious agent navigating the polarity. The goal isn't to get rid of the black squares. It's to learn how to walk the path with balance.
And to do that, you use the great lights of Masonry, the square and the compasses. These are the tools that define the moral geometry you need to regulate yourself and interact with the world. They set the boundaries for the work.
Let's break those down, starting with the square.
The square is primarily about the material world, your external conduct. It's the symbol of morality, teaching you to square your actions by the square of virtue. It's about being fair, honest, and upright in your dealings with other people. It's the earthly, measurable part of the work.
And the compasses are the opposite. They're for the internal spiritual world.
Exactly. The compasses draw circles. And morally, they teach the initiate to circumscribe our desires and keep our passions within due bounds. Ventral. So while the square is about your actions towards others, the compasses are about governing your inner self, defining your own moral boundaries, making sure your ambition, your desires, your passions don't lead you outside that circle of virtue.
Which is a direct parallel to Agent Cooper. The moment his passions, or really the audience's passions for a violent conclusion, went outside the circle drawn by the compasses, he was lost, possessed.
It's a perfect parallel. And the Masonic ritual itself emphasizes this. As you advance through the degrees, the way the square and compasses are positioned on the altar changes. It symbolizes the growing dominance of the spiritual, the compasses over the material, the square. The goal is always that balanced life, achieved through the ongoing work of moral geometry.
So whether it's Lynch's films or Masonic ritual, the value is in the active, conscious process of navigating duality and doing the work of refinement.
And this work inevitably leads us to the big questions of what happens when you try to finish it. It leads to consequences, and the fact that the work must, by its very nature, always be unfinished.
So we've established that the process, the work, is everything. What happens if you try to rush it? Or if you demand a conclusion that hasn't really been earned through that work? Both of these systems have some pretty stark warnings about that.
In Freemasonry, the rituals of initiation are designed from the ground up to show that every single act, every piece of knowledge you gain, has a consequence. There's a reward for following the path and a penalty for straying. It immediately gives everything a sense of gravity.
The knowledge isn't trivial. It comes with a heavy responsibility.
It really does.
Yeah.
Masonry views itself as a custodian of this long tradition of initiation and moral teaching.
Yeah.
And preserving that means you have to think critically, you have to question your assumptions, not just grab for easy answers. To try and rush that process is seen as a serious failure of responsibility.
Now let's map that directly onto Twin Peaks. The audience's demand for closure, that critical failure of Statement 2, it led to this spectacular corruption. It was a demonstration of the dire consequences of demanding the mystery end.
Well, the sources describe that desire for closure as a kind of bug in the modern consciousness, a hunger for sensation, for violence, for simple, sad endings. And that bug got into the show. It forced the reveal. And what was the result? The agent of light and intuition, Dale Cooper, gets possessed by the ultimate darkness, Bob.
You know, I wonder if Lynch intended that whole disaster, Cooper becoming Mr. C, as the ultimate lesson, a kind of meta-ritual for the audience, showing them what their craving for closure actually creates.
I think you have to see it that way. The consequence was made devastatingly real. Mr. C wasn't just a slightly darker Cooper. He was pure violence, pure deceit. He spends the next 25 years committing horrific crimes, all while trying to avoid going back to the lodge. The whole investigation, which was supposed to bring light and justice, ended with the darkness not just winning, but taking over and thriving for decades.
It's like the show turned on its audience and said, you wanted an ending, here it is, the good guy failed completely. One of the sources put it perfectly. The show failed to face its shadow self with courage. And in trying to solve the evil, it became the evil it was trying to fight.
It's a huge warning sign. When you seek a simple, definitive end, you stop the necessary work of striving. And if you stop that work, the darker elements, whether you call them superfluous excrescences or the entity Bob, they're going to fill that vacuum.
This brings us to the ultimate symbol that ties all this together, the temple. The Masonic Lodge is set up as a representation of King Solomon's temple, which is itself a model of the universe supported by 3 pillars: wisdom, strength, and beauty.
It's the framework for construction, but the building material isn't stone, it's human character. The real edifice they're trying to build is the spiritual structure of the self and of the brotherhood as a whole.
And the tool that symbolizes putting it all together, that unification, is the trowel.
Right. Operatively, a trowel spreads cement to bind the stones together. Speculatively, it's used to spread the cement of brotherly love and affection. It's what unites all the individual masons, who are called living stones, into one single structure, the temple of character.
But if that's the goal, the temple of character, how do the sources make it clear that this building is never actually finished, at least not here on Earth?
They're very explicit about it. The temple of character is always building and built upon. The path to that spiritual perfection is shown through the allegory of Jacob's ladder. The ladder rests on their sacred texts, and its main rungs are faith, hope, and charity.
And that climb up through faith, hope, and charity, where does it lead?
It leads to the ethereal mansion, not built by hands, but eternal in the heavens. That phrase, not built by hands, is key. It reinforces that the ultimate ideal, the perfect spiritual state, is something you're always aiming for, but it's fundamentally unreachable in our material earthly world. The daily grind, the work with the squaring compasses, is the only way to keep climbing.
The second you stop climbing the ladder, the moral work stops. So this perpetual task it's the whole point.
Exactly. And this idea of a perpetually unfinished grand structure isn't just in Masonry or in David Lynch's brain. It's actually baked into the foundational identity of the American experiment itself.
This is where it gets really wild. We find this concept on one of the most famous yet least understood American symbols, the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States.
That's right, the unfinished pyramid. A pyramid is a symbol of strength and duration, but this one is deliberately left incomplete. The capstone, with the Eye of Providence, is floating above it. It's an explicit national statement that the work isn't done.
Which is so counterintuitive. Humans love to finish things, to build monuments and say, there, it's complete. Why bake this idea of perpetual striving into the national identity?
Because it reflects the idea that freedom and virtue aren't things you achieve once and then possess forever. They are processes. Thomas Jefferson said it perfectly when he observed that the generation that starts a revolution rarely completes it. They lay the foundation, the rough ashlar, but the real work of perfecting it is left to every generation that follows.
The foundation is just the start of the job.
And Walt Whitman picked up on this so beautifully in 1856. The country was founded, but it was still deeply conflicted. He called America a divine true sketch, not a finished masterpiece. He praised the original architects, but he insisted that as much more remains to be done.
What did he think needed to be done?
He said that other architects are needed, whose duty is not less difficult, but perhaps more difficult. The challenge of the founders, just establishing a nation, was immense. But the challenge for everyone after them, perfecting that nation, perfecting the union, is an ongoing ethical and maybe even harder task.
So it connects the individual's work on himself, the rough ashlar, with the collective work on the nation, the unfinished pyramid. Both demand that same commitment to perpetual labor.
The perfection of the union, the perfection of your character, the climb up Jacob's ladder, it's all an unfinished work. To assume it's finished is to reject the daily grind. And as Twin Peaks taught us, rejecting that grind is an invitation for darkness to seep in. The only real light comes from constantly engaging with the shadow, acknowledging the parts that are still rough, and staying committed to the work of the square.
So there it is, the ultimate synthesis. David Lynch's philosophy demands that the mystery must persist because closure kills intuition. Speculative Freemasonry demands that the rough ashlar is perpetually being worked on because the temple of character is always building toward a divine ideal. And the Great Seal insists that the nation itself is forever incomplete.
And the single truth that runs through all three is that the journey, the striving, the continuous act of becoming, that is the ultimate source of all meaning and all moral value.
So this deep dive has shown this incredible, unexpected alignment between the bizarre dream worlds of Twin Peaks and the solemn, symbolic world of the Masonic Lodge. The path to understanding, whether you're using Lynchian intuition or Masonic allegory, is the path of continual work, of consciously navigating duality, and of strict self-regulation.
The value, at the end of the day, is in the becoming, not in the having. The mystery is what keeps the work alive, whether that's the mystery of who Laura Palmer really was, the effort to control your passions with the common gavel, or the national project of building up that unfinished pyramid. That constant pursuit is what creates any enduring light or virtue.
So we'll leave you with a final provocative thought. If the ultimate lesson from Twin Peaks is that demanding full closure leads to possession and darkness, and the whole point of Freemasonry is the perpetual refinement of the self, what current mysteries in your own life, personal, societal, whatever, are you rushing to close? What definitive answer are you demanding? And what valuable constructive work might you be missing in that rush? Remember that the architect's most important job isn't the finished building. It's the daily commitment to making sure your foundations and your character remain true and square, even if the temple is never fully finished.